Hello, something guys and gals. This is Something Guy 912. This video is not going to be a response video or a video picking apart the mindset of some SJW or disingenuous hack. This video is going to be a much more calmer, introspective one about my philosophy compared to the philosophy of others when it comes to differing worldviews. So take a seat, relax, and just enjoy what I have to say. What I've noticed about bipartisan beliefs in the United States from Bush Gore to Trump Hillary is a noticeable lack of amicability and flexibility to differing ideals. The Republicans will inevitably claim that the Democrats are a bunch of bleeding heart hippie tree huggers who want to suck on Stalin's socialist cock straight to the balls, and the Democrats will inevitably claim that the Republicans are a bunch of gun-toting xenophobes who want to wall everything that they don't like and give tax breaks to the wealthy elite. This false dichotomy, like with the false dichotomy of Fury Road, only serves to make people toxic to the idea that their beliefs can be challenged. Fox News keeps their conservative viewpoints to a T, and the same goes for the Young Turks or MSNBC for their liberal viewpoints. Neither of these parties are going to be convinced of their rigid mindset almost entirely based on the fact that they have a R or a D behind their name. Any call for gun regulation to the conservative is going to be seen as you wanting to destroy the Second Amendment, and any call for cross-referencing those going into our country will be seen as being a racist xenophobe to a liberal. It is this that I want to entertain, and not so often, but curiously important phrase. If you have ever heard of reaching across all sides of the table, this phrase essentially means giving each and every party the ability to speak their piece on something, disregarding any preconception of your own personal beliefs in favor of entertaining or humoring another. This is a philosophy that I believe in, even when it comes to the regressive liberal mindset of the SJWs. They are right when they are in fact racist in America. When it comes to systematic racism, well, that's a whole load of bullshit. There is indeed sexists in America, but the idea that this is on a worldwide scale, or that any woman who benefits from the systemic system is only contributing to it, is all absolutely ridiculous, with enough fine-tooth combing into the logic behind it. No belief system is absolutely wrong. Sure, there are that are going to be much more wrong on every fundamental level than another. But every belief system has just that margin of being right that keeps their beliefs obscure but still niche to them. Do not get this wrong. Reaching across all sides of the table is not the same as pandering to all sides of said table. This philosophy does not require you to confide in every belief system, only merely to hear them out and decide for yourself if you will concede to their demands or ideas. This must be done, of course, without any inherent bias or preconception on your part. If your experience of an SJW has been awful in past times, for example, do not let that blind you from hearing out someone who could be considered an SJW, for even if they are wrong 99.9% of the time, that small 0.1% that you ignore for the sake of the majority percent only shows your weakness in adhering to different opinions. As I said before, I believe in this philosophy and apply it not only to myself but also to my video games. In games like Fallout 3 or New Vegas, I always tried to find a middle ground with all the major factions and to hear each faction out, like with the NCR, Mr. House, the Legion, or Yes Man. Sure, you aren't ever going to get the NCR or the Legion to be neutral to each other in the game, but the ability to humble yourself and allow the Legion to explain why they personally think slavery and ancient Greek tribunals is the best way to run New Vegas, or the NCR to explain to you why their tax-heavy, strong-arm bureaucracy is the best means to preserve New Vegas, will allow you to better determine where you side. As for which side I went on this, I always sided with the NCR, as the slavery and their crucifixion of others from the Legion always was so off-putting for me that I couldn't allow myself the capacity to understand why they feel they must do what they do. I'll admit that I showed an inability to follow my own philosophy when it came to this, but I doubt that even if I did hear them out on it, I would not be convinced to side with them. So, let's go into a game where this message hits home. In Skyrim, there are two main factions in regards to the control of Skyrim as a whole, the Imperials and the Stormcloaks. The Stormcloaks' reason to fight is justified as they believe that the Imperials have bent over and taken it in the ass to the whims of the Aldmeri Dominion, as well as them banning Talos worship, as the Aldmeris believe that a mere mortal cannot ascend to godhood. While Stormcloaks are in the right for rebelling against the Empire, they have one major flaw. They are a bunch of xenophobes and intolerants to pretty much anyone who isn't Nordic, especially the Dark Elves that inhabit Wilhelm as a result of the Red Mountain erupting, forcing them out from their homes in Morrowind to seek solace in Windhelm. Ulfric Stormcloak, the leader of the Stormcloaks, isn't exactly for this mentality, but he has also not been against it either. As a result of this xenophobia, a lot of the support that the Stormcloaks could have is mired by that as a result. The Khajiits and the Argonians that Nords despise side with the Thalmor merely out of principle of bigotry, rather than simply a disagreement in policy, including some Dark Elves, which is doubly ironic considering High Elves are as hateful of Dark Elves as Nords are. Then we have the Empire, who are generally tolerant of anyone who sides with them, even Nords, and the Thalmor are not so obviously blatant about their bigotry towards certain races, as long as they can instill them into the belief due to the bigotry of the Stormcloaks. But the problem with them is exactly what I pointed up above. They are a fleeting establishment of the once great Septon bloodline, and as a result, the Aldmeri Dominion that ruled back in the Second Era are regaining control in the Fourth. These two philosophies will dictate to those who will side over the other, and to use a weak analogy, Ulfric Stormcloak is Donald Trump, and General Tullius, or the Empire generally, is Hillary Clinton. Donald is fighting against the establishment as Ulfric is, and Hillary, or the Empire, are attempting to preserve it for as long as it is palatable. People will be put off by the fact that those who believe in Trump are not exactly the most tolerant of other races, while others do not support the establishment that Hillary seeks to keep running and milking it for all it's worth. But did I ever tell you that there is actually a secret third faction in this game? It's the Greybeards. In my many plays of Skyrim, I never found that if you do the main Dragonborn questline with the Greybeards, you will inevitably have to seek a peace treaty with the Stormcloaks and the Empire through the Greybeards, as the dragons ravishing the land are making the civil war in Skyrim even more constrained than before, as the Stormcloaks are fighting more dragons than they are Imperials, and the Empire have strengthened their resources in order to keep everyone safe from dragon attacks. So as a result, both sides have to confide to a peace treaty where you can actually choose what compromises each faction has to do in order to calm the ties and focus more strenuously on the problem at hand. Alduin, the World Eater. Knowing this, I would have never considered to pick these two sides to begin with, as both have their good reasons to exist, but more importantly, it would have been the most productive decision that both sides could have made. No lives would be lost, all walls would have been broken down, and while it wouldn't necessarily mean peace between the Nords and the Empire, at least the resulting civil war would have been postponed. This is exactly what I mean by this philosophy. Give everyone the opportunity to speak their piece on something, regardless of a preconception or bias, regardless of your perception of who is speaking. Just take it by face value and interpret for yourself whether it can hold water. This would be more productive for anyone who has a rigid structure or belief to withhold, because you will never know if you are actually wrong on some topic. That goes for anti-SJWs as well as SJWs, even if the anti-SJWs are inevitably going to be fundamentally right. It's also the reason that a lot of people aren't going to entertain anything that an SJW says based on principle of them funneling out anyone who hasn't already come into their conversation on their knees and begging. Since we're on a binge for Bethesda games in this video, let's use one more example where not being able to reach across the table becomes a big problem for the player and the factions. Fallout 4. There are three main warring factions. The Brotherhood, who are opposed to synth technology of any kind and therefore must eradicate the Institute and the Railroad for different reasons, even if it may require them to police harmless citizens from above. The Institute, who are making many scientific marvels but are absolutely untrustworthy of life above the surface and are extremely isolationist in nature, and the Railroad, who seek to free rogue Sims from their routine programming but as a result have let many Sims run amok as raiders or slavers. Each of these factions have good intentions, but each have their own flaws. Naturally, you would think that you could convince Elder Maxon, the leader of the Brotherhood, or Desdemona, the leader of the Railroad, or Father, the leader of the Institute, to seek a different perspective on their original beliefs. Father believes that life above the surface is dead, despite much evidence to contradict that, such as the Minutemen or Diamond City. Desdemona wants to free all Sims from their natural programming, yet you can infer that you have come across some Sims that have become raider leaders, and as a result, there is some reason to keep a certain amount of programming to keep Sims in line with objectively good moralities. And Elder Maxon wants to eradicate all Sims, yet not knowing that Paladin Dance, unknowingly a synth, was absolutely dedicated to the philosophy of the Brotherhood despite him being a robot. All of these things you would think would allow these leaders to reconsider their preconceptions, but unfortunately you can't do any of that. This is in due part to the dialogue wheel in the game that minimizes your ability to convince these leaders of a different path, or better yet, a compromise with the other two factions, and the idea that these leaders will not be swayed no matter what to a different idea. This isn't an absolutely absurd concept. No matter how much evidence you lay on someone, you may still not be able to convince them to your side. But the fact that you can't even demonstrate the evidence in the game in the first place is one weakness of many in Fallout 4. But this video isn't about critiquing the game. This is about the concept that the title of this video conveys. Do your best to listen to all sides of the coin before preliminarily deciding what side of the coin you want to face on. I tried my best to see all sides of these three factions, but I could not, and the game would not allow me to convince the three of a different path that would be much more productive in the long run. Fallout 4, unlike Skyrim, absolutely forced you to pick sides, and while I was initially on the side of the Brotherhood from Fallout 3, my alignment with them was much more constrained, considering their militaristic strong-arming of civilization compared to their good-heartedness from Fallout 3. As a result of this, I had to find a middle ground somehow. And while this middle ground faction is not ideally the best, it is the start. The Minutemen. Depending on how far you progress in certain faction missions, the Minutemen will mold to you based on your alignment with the three main factions. You can't necessarily have all three factions peacefully living with each other mutually, but you can save at least two of the factions without two of the three being thrown to the garbage bin. While I would have favored saving all three factions, two of the three is better than one. This middle ground faction will still not allow you to convince Robbie or Preston Garvey not to destroy the one faction that you'll be throwing to the waste, no matter how much glaring evidence to prove a justification of their existence. But at least, more or less, you can peacefully make a treaty with the other two factions passively. This could be a lesson in beliefs that the game is trying to push home, that some people are so inflexible to differing opinions that even if they are 99% wrong, they'll hold on to that 1% of them being right to the grave. Your response to said rigidity should come with strident dismay, but not without a bit of understanding as to why that person believes what they believe. You can't convince everyone, and coming into a conversation to convince everyone is wishful thinking at best and egotistical at worst. The best you can do with any belief you hold is to be humble and allow yourself to absorb any and all information with the same amount of value as to the next. And yes, I have already stated that some information is already going to have less value as others, such as the moon being pink and being made out of cheese. But allow yourself to at least humor the idea for a moment. That moment will be much more valuable than being casually dismissive of the statement. Open yourself to all ideas and ultimately reach across all sides of the table.